Hi guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the Roaring Twenties and what happens once people were removed from the World War I and we're starting to really get into that lost generation and what society is like after this. And so for today, what you need to do is you need to include this information in your notes, and you need to title it as the Roaring Twenties, and it's under theme number 2, economic transformations. If you remember, after last time, we talked about the end of World War I and what that meant for people and how that meant kind of this big sigh of relief. But it also meant a lot of fear and anxiety, whether it was through groups like the Lost Generation that really felt kind of disillusioned with society and felt like people had left them behind, or whether it was with nativists and the people who were afraid of communism spread and the Red Scare. Or even the rise of the KKK again, and how it really comes to symbolize this time period of doubt and uncertainty. So while you have what we'll talk about today, all of this kind of excitement and exuberance and this living, a large life and having a great lifestyle, it also comes to characterize a time that is very fearful and afraid of the other, of people who are different than the rest of Americans, whether it's immigrants, whether it's people who believe politically different, or whether that's just individuals who do not see, or who see people of a different skin color or a different religion as somehow less than themselves. So this time period in the 1920s is known as the boom times. And it's that way because we see a growth of industry, of technological advancement, and also people investing their money in the stock market. And when we talk about the 1920s for our period here, we're not going to get super deep into the development of the stock market and how people really become rich, because we're going to save that for our discussion on the 1930s and the Great Depression. But understand that this is the first time people are really starting to spend money. They're really starting to get involved in these times, and people are starting to make a lot of wealth. You're really starting to see people expand that distance between the upper class and the lower classes. Now, when it comes to politics, one individual who we need to focus on is our president of the United States at this time by the name of Warren G. Harding. He takes office with a pledge to return America to normalcy. And that was actually a made-up word. Nobody had ever heard of the word normalcy. Today, you've probably heard of that, at least somewhat been used. But at the time, Warren G. Harding used it, and people thought, what the heck is that? I've never heard that. And the idea was he wants to get back to the way things were, the way things always have been, the normal ways of life. He wants to kind of bring people back into this. Now, Harding has a lot of administrative policies that are good and bad, but one of them one of the problems of the Warren G. Harding administration is he tends to hire a lot of his friends for his positions, mainly because he trusts them, but unfortunately, they're not really the people you should be trusting. And his presidency becomes defined by something called the Teapot Dome scandal, and it really kind of tarnishes his reputation. We'll get into that much more in class, but one of the main things you need to remember is this puts a lot of strain on Harding, and while he's in office, he actually contracts pneumonia. He ends up passing away in office, and he's going to be replaced by his vice president, Calvin Coolidge. Now, Coolidge takes over, and he is actually very pro-business. He's going to kind of go back to the ideas of laissez-faire. He largely believes that the government or the economy could take care of itself. They did not need government to be involved in everything. Remember those ideas of Adam Smith and laissez-faire, which is pretty counter to what we had just talked about in the progressive movement. But this is the time frame people are living in. They have this feeling of live and let live. Let's keep the good times rolling. And what we notice throughout history, and what I hope you'll notice too as we continue to talk about the economic periods, is when times are good, people want less regulation. They want less government involvement. When times are bad, they feel like they want that government safety net. And this is a good example of that. When times were bad at the end of the Gilded Age, people were much more willing to have the progressive era happen and the progressives be in charge because they thought they were going to get something from it. They thought they were going to clean up their streets and have better education. Now in the Jazz Age, in the Roaring 20s, times are good. Happy days are here again, as one song at the time famously said. And people feel like they don't need government's help as much anymore. And so they want to kind of go return back to those ideas of laissez-faire. Now, Calvin Coolidge is elected to his own term in 1924. And this is nothing more than just kind of fun information. He actually was nicknamed Sleepy Cow because he slept for 11 hours a day. But he actually was kind of a fitness nut. He would have a lot of his aides actually work out with him. His famous tagline for being president is "Keep cool with Coolidge," and I don't know if there's ever a bumper sticker or a sign that is a little as strange as this one, because you get something like there that says "Keep cool with Coolidge," yet Calvin Coolidge on the side there looks like he doesn't want to become president. He looks quite depressed, and like, I don't know if I would want to vote for that individual based off that picture. Now, one of the last things we're going to talk about today before we wrap up is the Great Migration. And this is quite possibly one of those events that really reshapes the way America looks even to this day, but yet often gets kind of left out of history books. It usually gets a couple pages at most, but it doesn't actually get the importance that it really deserves. At this time, the majority of African Americans in this country lived in the South. Many of them were had ancestors who were slaves. Many of them were children of former slaves or grandchildren of former slaves. And so many of them had lived through the Jim Crow era of Southern persecution that had happened post-Civil War. At this time, many African Americans basically say, forget this, I'm going to pack up my stuff, my belongings, and I'm going to seek out a new life and move somewhere else. And many of them moved to northern cities. Over 1 million African Americans leave the South at this time, and they start to begin to move to the north for things like jobs, for protection, to help escape racism. And one of the main areas that they're going to end up focusing in addition to Chicago and Cleveland, for instance, is Harlem, New York, which is a kind of a borough of New York City. Now, Harlem at this time becomes a really big hotbed for jazz music and for art and for poetry and for philosophy within the African American community. And this time is actually kind of given a nickname of what's known as the Harlem Renaissance. And if you remember back when we talked about the Renaissance before, that means rebirth or rebirth in culture and ideas. And while African American culture never really went away like it did in the early Renaissance, we talked about, kind of the medieval times and Renaissance, this is a time where you get a larger recognition of of African Americans' contribution to society and to culture. If you look here at this picture, you can really see some of the places that many African Americans moved to. And today, this is kind of some of the largest African American communities in the United States are here. Places like San Diego and Los Angeles on the West Coast, Oakland and San Francisco and Seattle. Many of them from Mississippi and Alabama went to Illinois and Wisconsin and Chicago. Cleveland, Ohio is a big place for many African Americans from Georgia. And many of you who maybe have family members who did not grow up here probably came from Georgia. South Carolina, North Carolina were mostly populated by African Americans moving to the Mid-Atlantic states of Baltimore, New York, and Philadelphia. Finally, one last group we do need to talk about are women. Women really begin to kind of come into their own and take more social and political power at this time. And one group in particular are a group of women known as flappers. Now, you may be somewhat familiar with women being known as flappers. You've probably seen the Halloween costumes before, people who men dress as gangsters and women dress as flappers. And that is kind of an example of exactly what a female at this time would dress like. Often in short skirts. They would have short bob haircuts, or maybe even what we call today like pixie cuts. They often drank and smoked and swore and drove cars, and they wore makeup for the first time. And the idea is they're really showing their independence. They're living free. They're enjoying life. They're trying to assert some of that control over themselves that men had for years. And for a lot of women, this is not just a way to dress or a way to act. It's a lifestyle. And it really comes to characterize this time period. This is also around the same time that women will begin to get their suffrage or the right to vote. And so for women, this is kind of their moment to really assert their control. World War I has ended. It has changed the political landscape. And for a lot of African Americans and a lot of women, it's a time of really trying to take back control of their life and take back control of some of their rights that they had not been granted over the course of history. So that's it for the main part of this one. Now, there's a lot more we can go into, and we'll talk about in class about lifestyle changes and the introduction of the automobile, for instance, and continuation of flappers, and we'll get into the next video ideas like prohibition and the idea of evolution. And it becomes a very important and very controversial issue in the 1920s. There'll be a very famous trial, and we'll catch up again with one of our old favorites, William Jennings Bryan. He'll show up one more time in history class. We'll talk about him next time. Until then, what I do need you to do is make sure that you have this in your notes. Please also make sure you have at least two essay questions that you come up with at the bottom of your notes that we can maybe use in class. If you have any other questions, please make sure that you let me know. We'll discuss each of these in class. And until then, that's it. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.